Dawn broke over the mountain range like a watercolor painting in progress. First a hint of pale yellow, then streaks of amber and gold that gradually pushed back the indigo canvas of night. The air carried that distinctive mountain chill, sharp and clean, with the promise of warmth once the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Dew clung to the underbrush, sparkling on spider webs stretched between juniper branches like diamond necklaces. The hunter had been awake for nearly an hour, already dressed in his weathered camouflage gear that had seen 15 seasons of wear. At 52, his face was a topographical map of experience, lines etched by squinting into countless dawns, weathering summer storms, and enduring winter hunts when the temperature dropped so low, his breath crystallized before his eyes. His hands, calloused and strong, moved with practiced efficiency as he checked his pack one final time. This particular stretch of the Rockies had been his hunting ground for over 2 decades. He knew every ridge, every drainage, every game trail that meandered through the lodgepole pines and aspens. The hunter had built his reputation on this knowledge, occasionally guiding wealthy clients from the city who wanted the authentic experience without the years of trial and error. But today was personal, just him and the mountains he considered more home than the modest cabin he maintained in the valley below. His German shepherd, a loyal companion of 8 years, sat patiently by the door, ears perked forward in anticipation. The animal seemed unusually restless this morning, pacing after brief periods of sitting still. "What's got you worked up, old girl?" the hunter murmured, scratching behind the dog's ears. The animal whined softly, pressing against his leg. The cabin was simple but sufficient. One main room with a kitchen area and living space, dominated by a stone fireplace, a small bedroom and a bathroom added during a renovation 10 years back. Photos lined one wall, none with frames fancier than what could be found at the general store 30 miles down the valley. Images of his son and daughter, now grown and living their own lives in separate states, fishing trips, a wedding photo of him and his ex-wife, both smiling with the optimism that eventually eroded under the strain of his extended absences. The hunter poured the last of his coffee into a thermos, its exterior scratched and dented from countless trips into the backcountry. The ritual was comforting. Coffee, gear check, weather assessment. The forecast called for clear skies, unusual for late October when storms could roll in without warning, trapping the unprepared in dangerous conditions. Something felt off today. The hunter couldn't place it, but after 20 years reading the subtle language of the mountains, he'd learned to trust his instincts. The birds outside were quieter than usual. Even the chipmunks that regularly raided his bird feeder seemed to be taking the morning off. The dog whined again, more insistently. All right, let's move out," the hunter said, hoisting his pack onto shoulders that had carried similar burdens thousands of times before. The familiar weight was almost comforting. Binoculars, first aid kit, extra layers, hunting knife, compass, even though he also carried GPS, water, and provisions for the day. His rifle, a bolt-action .30-06 passed down from his father, was the last item he collected, checking the chamber out of habit even though he knew it was empty. He'd load it once he reached his hunting area, away from the cabin. The mountain air hit his face as he stepped onto the porch, crisp and carrying the scent of pine. The dog bounded ahead, momentarily forgetting whatever had been bothering her, racing to the tree line before stopping to look back expectantly. The hunter took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. This was his church, these mountains, the place where problems seemed smaller against the vastness of granite peaks and endless sky. The divorce 5 years ago had nearly broken him, but it was here, in these mountains, that he had rebuilt himself, piece by piece. He started up the familiar trail, boots crunching on the mixture of dirt and gravel. The grade increased quickly, a steady climb that would have winded a less experienced hiker, but the hunter maintained an even pace. His breathing remained controlled, years of traversing these elevations evident in his economy of movement. 3 hours into the hike, the hunter reached a viewpoint that overlooked a valley he rarely visited. It was outside his usual hunting grounds, a bit too remote, the game less predictable. But something had drawn him this way today, a feeling he couldn't articulate. The dog had settled somewhat, but still exhibited unusual behavior, stopping frequently to sniff the air, ears swiveling to catch sounds that seemed beyond the hunter's perception. "What is it, girl?" he asked, kneeling to run a hand along her back. The animal trembled slightly under his touch. The valley below stretched out like a massive bowl carved into the mountains, ringed by peaks still dusted with the remnants of last winter's snow that even the summer heat couldn't completely erase. A stream cut through the center, glinting occasionally when the sun caught it just right. The forest was a patchwork of evergreens, interrupted by occasional meadows and rock slides. The hunter raised his binoculars, scanning methodically. Something about the pattern of trees halfway down the opposite slope caught his attention, too regular for natural growth. He adjusted the focus, trying to get a better view. That's when he saw it, a glint of metal where no metal should be. The hunter lowered his binoculars, blinking to refocus his eyes on the middle distance. That metallic reflection was definitely out of place in this remote section of wilderness. His mind cycled through possibilities, perhaps an old crash site, though no flight paths crossed this isolated section of the range. Maybe debris carried by spring floods, though the position on the slope made that unlikely. Curiosity piqued, he decided to investigate. The detour would add several hours to his day, but the mystery tugged at him with an urgency he couldn't ignore. The dog seemed to sense his decision, moving restlessly at his side. "Let's check it out," he said, adjusting his pack straps and beginning the descent into the valley. The trek down was challenging. What had appeared as a manageable slope through binoculars revealed itself to be steeper terrain, broken by rock outcroppings and deadfall. The hunter picked his way carefully, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Despite the technical difficulty, he moved with the confidence of someone who had navigated similar terrain countless times. Crossing the valley floor took another hour. The stream was running high for October, fed by early snowmelt from higher elevations. The hunter found a crossing where the water braided into multiple channels, none deeper than his mid-calf. The cold water penetrated his boots immediately, a familiar discomfort he barely registered. The ascent up the opposite slope began easily enough, working through sparse underbrush and widely spaced pines. As he climbed higher, however, the vegetation thickened, slowing his progress. The dog stayed close now, no longer ranging ahead as she typically would. The hunter stopped periodically to confirm his course, using his binoculars to reacquire the metal reflection. The angle was different now, the glint less obvious, but he was confident in his navigation. 2/3 of the way up the slope, the forest changed character. The trees were more widely spaced here, and something about their arrangement struck the hunter as unnatural. As he drew closer, he realized why. These trees had been planted, decades ago perhaps, but deliberately placed to form a rough perimeter. His heartbeat quickened slightly, an instinctive response to the unexpected. The hunter unslung his rifle, loading a round into the chamber more from habit than any sense of threat. The weapon's familiar weight in his hands was reassuring as he advanced more cautiously. The dog growled softly, hackles raised. "Easy," the hunter whispered, reaching down to touch her head. He pushed through a final screen of underbrush and found himself in a small clearing. At first, his eyes couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. The forest floor appeared disturbed, with a depression roughly 10 feet square. In the center of this depression sat a metal crate, its surface corroded by decades of exposure but still recognizably military in origin. Olive drab paint visible in patches, stenciled lettering barely legible on one side. The hunter approached slowly, every sense heightened. The clearing was unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the constant mountain breeze seemed to have paused. The crate was larger than he had initially estimated, approximately 4 feet on each side. Heavy-duty clasps secured the lid, their once gleaming metal now dulled and stained with rust. The hunter set his rifle carefully against a nearby tree and moved closer, dropping to one knee beside the object. His fingers traced the faded lettering. U.S. Army was still visible, along with a series of numbers and letters that might have been a designation code. Below that, barely legible, classified material. The hunter's pulse throbbed in his ears. He'd served briefly in the Army after high school, enough to recognize this as no ordinary supply container. Whatever this crate contained had been important enough to transport to this remote location and then apparently abandon. He examined the clasps. Despite the corrosion, they seemed operational, designed to last decades under harsh conditions. The hunter hesitated, years of wilderness ethics warring with overwhelming curiosity. Interfering with military property, even abandoned material, could carry serious consequences. The dog whined again, backing away from the crate. That decided it. The hunter reached for the first clasp, finding it stiff but functional. The metal groaned as he worked it free, decades of inactivity resisting his efforts. The second clasp was similarly reluctant, but eventually yielded. With both clasps released, the hunter gripped the edge of the lid. It was heavier than expected, requiring his full strength to lift. As the lid rose, hinges protesting, a rush of stale air escaped, not putrid, but strange, carrying metallic and chemical notes that made his nostrils flare. The lid fell back with a dull thud. The hunter leaned forward, peering inside. The crate contained documents, hundreds of pages in folders, some secured with metal clasps, others bound with faded red tape marked confidential. But these weren't what captured his attention. Beneath the layer of documents was a false bottom, partially dislodged, revealing something that made his breath catch in his throat. The hunter reached down, carefully moving aside several folders to better expose what lay beneath. His fingers touched something smooth and cool, unlike any material he'd encountered before. It had the appearance of metal, but felt almost liquid to the touch, though it retained its shape. The object was roughly cylindrical, about 2 feet long and 8 inches in diameter. Its surface featured intricate patterns that seemed to shift slightly under his gaze, catching the filtered sunlight in ways that defied explanation. The patterns weren't engraved or embossed, but seemed to exist within the material itself, like three-dimensional images suspended in the strange substance. More disturbing were the symbols etched along one side, nothing like any alphabet or pictographic system the hunter had ever seen. They seemed to pulse faintly, though he told himself it must be a trick of the light filtering through the canopy above. The hunter's hand trembled slightly as he withdrew it. A cold sweat had broken out across his forehead despite the cool mountain air. Every instinct, honed by decades in wilderness where mistakes could be fatal, screamed that he had found something dangerous, something that should have remained buried. His mouth had gone dry. He swallowed with difficulty, trying to process what he was seeing. The dog barked suddenly, sharp and alarmed, causing the hunter to jerk backward. He nearly lost his balance, one hand shooting out to stabilize himself against the edge of the crate. That's when he noticed something else. The ground around the crate was subtly different. What he had taken for natural forest floor was actually a carefully crafted camouflage layer. One section had pulled away with the movement of the crate's lid, revealing a metal surface beneath. The crate wasn't just sitting on the ground. It was the visible portion of something much larger buried beneath the soil. The hunter sat back on his heels, mind racing. What initially appeared to be an abandoned military container was clearly part of something far more extensive. His first instinct was to leave immediately, report his finding to authorities, and let them handle whatever this was. But curiosity and a deeper sense of responsibility kept him rooted to the spot. He needed to document this. Carefully replacing the cylinder exactly as he'd found it, the hunter reached for his pack and retrieved his phone. The remote location meant no signal, but the camera would work fine. He took multiple photos of the crate, its contents, the strange cylinder, and the exposed metal surface beneath the camouflaged ground cover. The dog paced nervously at the edge of the clearing, refusing to approach the crate despite the hunter's reassuring calls. That behavior alone was telling. The animal had accompanied him on countless expeditions, showing interest rather than fear at new discoveries. Decision made, the hunter closed the crate, securing the clasps as he'd found them. He needed better equipment, and he needed to consider his next steps carefully. After marking the location on his GPS, he shouldered his pack and rifle, whistling softly to the dog who seemed all too eager to leave the clearing behind. The return journey to his cabin was made in record time, the hunter pushing himself harder than usual. The afternoon sun was already sliding toward the western peaks by the time he reached his vehicle, a weathered pickup truck that had survived 15 mountain winters. At the cabin, the hunter immediately transferred the photos to his laptop, examining them more carefully on the larger screen. The strange symbols were clearer now, and he could see details he'd missed in person. What appeared to be small access panels on the cylinder and markings along its base that resembled technical specifications. Most concerning were several documents partially visible in his photos. One folder was labeled Operation Cerberus. Another contained what looked like scientific diagrams. A third, its cover page clearly visible, bore an official seal the hunter didn't recognize, with a date from 1962 and a classification level stamped in red. Cosmic Top Secret. The hunter had never heard of such a classification during his military service. Standard levels were confidential, secret, and top secret. Whatever cosmic designated was beyond his experience. He spent hours researching online, limited by the spotty satellite internet connection at his cabin. He found references to classified Cold War programs, experimental aircraft, and even conspiracy theories about recovered extraterrestrial technology. None seemed to fit exactly what he'd discovered, but there were disturbing parallels. By midnight, the hunter had compiled notes and developed a rudimentary plan. He would need specialized equipment to properly investigate: a metal detector, better lighting, perhaps ground-penetrating radar if he could obtain it. He also needed to approach authorities, but carefully. His discovery could have national security implications. The next morning, the hunter drove to the nearest town, a small community of fewer than 5,000 residents that served as the commercial hub for the surrounding rural areas. His first stop was the hardware store, where he purchased a high-end flashlight, work gloves, and various tools that might prove useful. He considered renting a metal detector but decided against it. Too many questions from the proprietor, who knew him by profession if not by name. His next stop was the county sheriff's office, a single-story brick building that housed both law enforcement and the local fire department. The hunter hesitated before entering, acutely aware that what he was about to report would sound outlandish at best. The reception area was empty, except for a dispatch officer, a woman in her 40s whom the hunter recognized from previous interactions regarding hunting permits and occasional reports of poachers in the area. "Morning," she greeted him with professional courtesy. "How can I help you today?" The hunter cleared his throat. "I need to speak with someone about a discovery I made up in the mountains. It's unusual, might have military significance." Something in his tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the matter. The dispatcher studied him for a moment before reaching for her phone. "Sheriff Daniels is in a meeting, but Deputy Collins is available. He handles most of our coordination with federal agencies when needed." Minutes later, the hunter found himself seated across from Deputy Collins, a former Marine with a reputation for thoroughness. The office was spartanly furnished: a metal desk, filing cabinets, and walls adorned only with certifications and a county map marked with pins indicating various incidents. "So, what have you found that's got you concerned?" Collins asked, pen poised over a notepad. The hunter described his discovery in detail, careful to stick to observable facts rather than speculation. He mentioned the military crate, the documents, and the strange cylinder, but omitted his deeper suspicions about what it might be. As he spoke, he noticed Collins's expression shifting from professional interest to skepticism. "Do you have any proof of this?" the deputy asked when the hunter finished. The hunter nodded, pulling out his phone and bringing up the photos. He passed the device to Collins, who scrolled through them with a deepening frown. "These are interesting," Collins said finally, handing back the phone. "But honestly, they don't show much that I can make sense of. Old military equipment gets abandoned in remote areas more often than people realize. Could be from a training exercise, an old supply cache, any number of things." "What about the classification levels? The strange object underneath?" the hunter pressed. Collins leaned back in his chair. "Look, I appreciate you bringing this in, I do. But we're a small department with limited resources. Without something more concrete, I can't justify dispatching officers to a location that remote based on this." He gestured at the phone. "So you're not going to do anything?" The hunter couldn't keep the frustration from his voice. "I didn't say that," Collins replied evenly. "I'll make a report and forward it to the appropriate federal agencies, Forest Service, maybe military liaison if the location is in or near any known training areas. But I need to be straight with you. This likely won't be high priority." The hunter nodded, not surprised but disappointed nonetheless. He'd expected bureaucratic resistance, but had hoped for more immediate interest given the potential significance. "How long will that process take?" he asked. Collins shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. You'll be contacted if they need more information." He paused, studying the hunter. "In the meantime, I'd strongly advise against returning to the site or disturbing anything further. If this is military property, interfering could have serious legal consequences." The warning was clear, as was the subtext. The deputy was humoring him, filing a report that would likely gather dust in some government office. The hunter thanked him and left, the weight of his discovery feeling heavier with each step. Back in his truck, the hunter sat for several minutes, considering his options. The responsible course would be to wait for official channels to work, however slowly. But something about the discovery, the strange symbols, the unnatural material of the cylinder, the excessive classification, suggested this wasn't a matter that should languish in bureaucratic limbo. He started the engine, decision made. He would return to the site tomorrow with better equipment. If authorities wouldn't take immediate action, he would document everything thoroughly, creating a record that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. That night, the hunter barely slept. His dreams were troubled by shifting symbols and strange metallic surfaces that seemed to move under his touch. He woke repeatedly, each time glancing at the clock and calculating how many hours remained until dawn. The dog refused to settle, pacing the cabin and occasionally stopping to stare out the windows into the darkness beyond, a low growl building in her throat. By first light, the hunter was already preparing his pack with the new equipment. Whatever lay buried in that remote mountain clearing, he was determined to uncover the truth, regardless of who might have tried to keep it hidden. The county library was housed in a brick building from the 1930s, its architecture reminiscent of WPA projects that had once employed thousands across the region. Despite numerous renovations over the decades, it retained an air of faded dignity with its oak shelving and brass fixtures worn smooth by generations of hands. The hunter arrived just after opening, the parking lot nearly empty on a weekday morning. His night had been restless, his mind repeatedly returning to that strange cylinder and the buried structure beneath it. Before returning to the site, he needed context, historical information about the region that might explain a classified military presence in such a remote location. The archives section occupied the library's basement, a space that smelled of old paper and the faint mustiness that seemed inevitable in mountain buildings, regardless of how well maintained. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a flat, institutional glow. A single archivist staffed the desk, a woman in her 60s with steel-rimmed glasses and the careful movements of someone who had spent decades handling fragile materials. She looked up as the hunter approached, offering a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How can I help you?" she asked, voice lowered to library-appropriate levels. The hunter had prepared his request carefully, keeping it vague enough to avoid suspicion, but specific enough to yield useful results. "I'm researching historical military presence in the western region of the county, particularly during the Cold War era. Government installations, testing sites, anything along those lines." The archivist's expression shifted subtly. Not suspicion exactly, but increased interest. "Any particular date range you're focusing on?" "Late 1950s through the 1960s, the hunter replied, thinking of the 1962 date he'd glimpsed on the documents. The woman nodded, rising from her desk. "We have several collections that might be relevant. County land records, newspaper archives, and a special collection donated by a local historian who documented federal activities in the region." She paused. "May I ask why you're interested in this topic?" The hunter had anticipated this question. "I'm writing a historical piece about forgotten Cold War infrastructure. The region has more history than most people realize." This seemed to satisfy the archivist. "Indeed it does. Follow me." She led him through narrow aisles of compact shelving to a research table partially hidden from the main area. "Wait here. I'll bring the relevant materials." 20 minutes later, the hunter was surrounded by cardboard boxes containing file folders, large format maps, and bound volumes of local newspapers preserved on acid-free paper. The archivist had provided cotton gloves for handling the older materials and basic instructions for documenting anything he wished to reference. "These haven't been digitized yet," she explained. "Budget constraints. Let me know if you need assistance." The hunter worked methodically, starting with county land records. Most were mundane: property transfers, tax assessments, easement agreements. But midway through the second box, he found what he was looking for: a series of land acquisitions by the Department of Defense in 1958, purchasing over 5,000 acres from multiple property owners. The location matched the general area where he'd found the crate. More interesting was what happened next. In 1964, all this land was officially returned to the county as surplus government property, subsequently incorporated into the National Forest System. Just 6 years of federal ownership, with no public record of what had occurred there. The newspaper archives provided additional context. The local paper had published several articles about the land acquisition, including interviews with displaced farmers and ranchers who had received what they considered generous compensation. The articles referenced a research station being established, with promises of jobs and economic development for the region. But by 1961, the tone had changed. A small article questioned the lack of visible development and minimal local employment. Another piece mentioned unusual equipment being transported along forest roads, with military personnel restricting access to certain areas. By 1962, the paper had stopped mentioning the facility altogether, not even a story about its decommissioning in 1964. The historian's collection proved most valuable. It contained photographs, grainy black and white images showing the construction of several buildings in a clearing that looked disturbingly similar to where the hunter had found the crate. One photo, dated June 1959, showed a group of men in both military uniforms and civilian attire standing before a partially completed structure. The caption identified them only as project staff, but one figure stood out, a civilian wearing a distinctive Institute of Advanced Study badge on his lab coat. Also included were hand-drawn maps detailing access roads that no longer appeared on modern maps, and the locations of multiple structures that had apparently been removed or concealed after the project ended. Most significant was a folder containing internal correspondence that the historian had somehow obtained, possibly through Freedom of Information requests or personal connections. Much of it was heavily redacted, but certain phrases jumped out: anomalous materials, unprecedented properties, and potentially non-terrestrial origin. One memo dated October 1961 particularly caught the hunter's attention. Following unexplained incidents at Site C, all personnel are reminded that direct contact with recovered materials is strictly prohibited. All examination must be conducted using approved handling protocols. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination and potential prosecution under the Espionage Act. The hunter photographed everything relevant, carefully handling each document and returning it exactly as he'd found it. By early afternoon, he had compiled substantial evidence that something highly unusual had occurred in precisely the area where he'd found the crate. "Find what you were looking for?" the archivist asked as he returned the materials. "Some useful background," the hunter replied non-committally. "Do you know if anyone else has researched this particular topic recently?" The archivist considered the question. "Not this specific collection, no. Though about 6 months ago, a government historian was here reviewing many of our Cold War-era materials. Never said which agency he represented." The hunter nodded, thanking her for the assistance. As he turned to leave, she added, "If you're interested in that research station, you might want to check the old Forest Service outpost. It was repurposed from one of the support buildings after the government pulled out. Been abandoned for decades now, but still standing last I heard." The location she provided was only a 30-minute drive from the library, an access road that had once been well-maintained, but now was little more than a rutted track through dense forest. The hunter's truck handled the terrain adequately, though he was forced to stop a quarter-mile short of his destination when a fallen tree blocked further progress. The Forest Service outpost was immediately recognizable as former military construction. A utilitarian concrete structure with minimal windows and a reinforced door that had long since been removed, leaving a gaping entrance partially blocked by encroaching vegetation. The hunter approached cautiously, acutely aware that he was alone, and that his earlier report to the sheriff's office had created a record of his interest in abandoned military sites. His dog stayed close, seemingly less disturbed by this location than by the crate, but still alert and wary. The interior was what one would expect after decades of abandonment. Concrete floors cracked from freeze-thaw cycles, walls covered with graffiti from occasional trespassers, debris scattered by animals and weather. But beneath this chaos, the hunter could see evidence of its original purpose. Heavy-duty electrical conduits ran along the walls, far more substantial than a Forest Service outpost would require. Metal brackets on the floor suggested equipment had once been bolted down. In what had likely been an office, the hunter found the remains of a filing cabinet, its drawers forced open long ago and contents scattered. Most papers had rotted into unrecognizable pulp, but behind the cabinet, protected from the worst of the elements, he discovered a plastic sleeve containing what appeared to be technical diagrams. The drawings showed a series of interconnected structures, some above ground, others partially or completely buried. Labels identified various sections: primary containment, research wing, decontamination, materials processing. The scale and complexity suggested something far beyond a simple research station. Most troubling was a detailed cross-section of what was labeled secure storage facility, a reinforced chamber buried 20 feet underground, accessible via a vertical shaft. The dimensions and configuration matched exactly what the hunter had begun to uncover. As he photographed these final documents, the hunter became aware of vehicle sounds in the distance. Someone else was approaching on the access road. Quickly gathering his findings, He exited through a rear window, circling around to approach his truck from the cover of the forest. No vehicle was visible, but fresh tire tracks indicated someone had parked just out of sight around a bend in the road. The hunter moved silently through the underbrush, his dog padding quietly beside him. Years of hunting had taught him to move without disturbing the forest around him. From concealment, he observed two men in unmarked dark green uniforms examining his truck. They carried no visible weapons but moved with the disciplined efficiency of military or law enforcement personnel. One spoke into a radio, too distant for the hunter to hear the conversation. The hunter retreated deeper into the forest, circling wide around the outpost and the access road. He would return for his truck after dark. For now, his priority was to return to the original site with his new information and equipment. The mountain paths would be challenging but navigable for someone with his experience. The hunter reached the clearing just before dusk, having approached via a circuitous route that avoided established trails. The physical exertion of the cross-country trek had been demanding, but the greater strain was psychological. The constant vigilance, the awareness that his discovery had triggered attention from unknown parties. The crate appeared undisturbed, exactly as he had left it. The hunter surveyed the clearing carefully before approaching, noting nothing out of place. His dog, however, showed renewed anxiety, reluctant to enter the space despite commands. The hunter unpacked his equipment methodically: the high-beam flashlight, a compact folding shovel, work gloves, and a small pry bar. He had also brought a portable power bank to ensure his phone remained charged for documentation. This time, he approached the investigation systematically. First, he photographed the entire clearing from multiple angles, establishing a visual baseline. Then he carefully removed the camouflage layer around the crate, revealing more of the metal surface beneath. What emerged was a hatch, approximately 6 feet in diameter, constructed of the same military-grade materials as the crate but far more substantial. Its surface featured similar stenciled markings: U.S. Army and authorized personnel only, along with warning symbols for both radiation and biohazard risks. The hatch had no obvious handle or wheel mechanism like those on naval vessels. Instead, it featured a recessed panel with what appeared to be a combination lock, not electronic but mechanical, designed to function without power. Adjacent to this was a smaller access panel secured with a standard padlock that had succumbed to decades of exposure, its mechanism seized by rust. The hunter attacked this vulnerable point, using the pry bar to break the corroded padlock with minimal effort. The access panel swung open to reveal an emergency override, a manual crank system designed to open the hatch when primary systems failed. He hesitated, aware that he was crossing a significant threshold. Entering a secured military facility, even an abandoned one, carried serious legal implications. But the strange cylinder, the historical documents, the unexplained attention his inquiry had attracted, all suggested something of profound importance lay hidden here. The crank mechanism was stiff but functional. As the hunter applied steady pressure, he heard mechanical sounds beneath the surface: the clunk of heavy bolts withdrawing, the hiss of an air seal breaking. After several minutes of effort, the hatch shifted slightly, rising perhaps an inch above its frame. Setting aside the crank, the hunter wedged the pry bar into this gap, gradually working the hatch open until it rose high enough to prop securely with a nearby fallen branch. The opening revealed a vertical shaft with metal rungs embedded in one wall, descending into darkness. The air that rose from the shaft was stale but breathable, carrying that same strange metallic scent he had noticed when opening the crate. The hunter directed his flashlight downward, revealing a concrete floor approximately 15 feet below. After securing his equipment in a backpack, the hunter began his descent, each rung solid despite decades of abandonment. The facility had been built to last, using materials that resisted the normal processes of decay. The dog remained at the surface, refusing to follow despite encouragement. The hunter tied her leash to a nearby tree, ensuring she wouldn't wander off in his absence. The chamber at the bottom of the shaft was a circular room approximately 20 feet in diameter, with 3 doorways leading to separate corridors. Remarkably, emergency lighting still functioned, dim red bulbs casting enough illumination to navigate by, suggesting some power source remained operational after all these years. The hunter consulted the facility diagrams he had photographed, orienting himself within the complex. The central corridor should lead to the main research area, while the left passage connected to storage and the right to what had been labeled specimen processing. He chose the central route, advancing cautiously with flashlight raised. The corridor extended approximately 50 feet, opening into a large chamber filled with what had once been advanced scientific equipment. Most was in disarray: toppled cabinets, shattered glass containers, equipment pulled from wall mountings. This wasn't mere decay. The room had been deliberately sabotaged, but the destruction hadn't been comprehensive. Several mainframe-style computers remained intact, their casings dusty but undamaged. Workstations with control panels featuring unfamiliar configurations lined one wall. Most significant was a circular platform in the center of the room, surrounded by equipment that appeared more advanced than 1960s technology should have been. The hunter photographed everything methodically, documenting each piece of equipment, every control panel, all visible documentation. Most labels had faded beyond legibility, but some remained clear enough to capture references to phase shifting, molecular reconstruction, and temporal anomaly monitoring. While photographing a control panel, the hunter noticed something alarming: a modern device attached to one of the mainframes, its LED status light blinking steadily. This was no relic from the 1960s, but current technology, a satellite uplink system with a dedicated power supply. Someone was monitoring this facility, collecting data from equipment that shouldn't still be functional, and judging by the dust patterns around the device, it had been installed within the last month. The hunter moved to the storage area next, finding it largely intact. Metal shelving units contained sealed containers, labeled with the same classification markings he had seen on the documents in the crate. Some containers had been removed, leaving dust-free outlines on the shelves, but many remained. One shelf held what appeared to be research journals, dozens of hardbound books with dates spanning from 1958 to 1962. The hunter selected one from 1961, corresponding to the time of the unexplained incidents mentioned in the memo he had found. The journal contained daily entries documenting experiments with what the writer referred to only as the artifact. Technical language obscured much of the content, but certain passages were clear enough. Sample continues to demonstrate properties that defy current scientific understanding. When subjected to electrical current, material temporarily alters its molecular structure, becoming permeable to solid matter while maintaining cohesion. Dr. Redacted suggests potential applications for secure storage of hazardous materials. And later, incident in Lab 3 remains unexplained. 2 researchers exposed to artifact during power fluctuation, both quarantined pending observation. Material appears to have transferred some unknown property to organic tissue. Subjects report unusual sensory experiences, described as seeing through time. Military oversight increased following incident. The final entry, dated November 12, 1962, was particularly disturbing. Termination protocols initiated following cabinet decision. All non-essential personnel removed from facility. Artifact to be secured in permanent containment. Research findings segregated by classification level. God help us if we've misunderstood what we've found. The hunter carefully returned the journal to its place, continuing his documentation. In the final room, specimen processing, he found evidence of medical equipment, examination tables with restraints, and monitoring systems far more advanced than should have existed in the early 1960s. Most concerning was a containment chamber in the center of the room, constructed of thick glass or similar transparent material. Within it stood a cylindrical device nearly identical to the one he had found in the crate, but larger, approximately 4 feet in height. Unlike the smaller version, this one was active, patterns shifting across its surface with increasing speed, symbols glowing with faint luminescence. As the hunter raised his phone to photograph this final discovery, the device's patterns suddenly accelerated, the glow intensifying. The air in the chamber seemed to distort around it, like heat waves rising from sun-baked asphalt. Without warning, every emergency light in the facility brightened to full intensity, then extinguished, plunging the complex into darkness broken only by the hunter's flashlight and the now pulsing glow of the cylinder. From somewhere above came the sound of his dog barking frantically, followed by the distinctive noise of vehicle engines. Someone had arrived at the surface, and the facility, dormant for decades, was waking up. The hunter extinguished his flashlight immediately, relying on the cylinder's pulsing glow to navigate back toward the entry shaft. Years of moving through forests at night had honed his ability to function in low-light conditions, each step careful but quick. As he reached the circular chamber at the base of the shaft, voices became audible from above. Terse commands delivered with military precision. A beam of light stabbed downward as someone began descending the ladder. The hunter retreated into the left corridor, concealing himself behind storage shelving. Through a narrow gap, he observed 3 individuals enter the chamber, 2 wearing tactical gear with no identifying insignia, armed with sidearms and carrying specialized equipment. The third wore civilian clothes but carried himself with an authority that marked him as their leader. Life signs showed 1 individual in the facility, the civilian stated, consulting a handheld device. Still registering but moving. Fan out. Non-lethal protocols only. We need to know what they've accessed. The hunter's pulse pounded in his ears as the team separated. One heading down the central corridor toward the main research area, another taking the right passage toward the active cylinder, while the civilian remained in the entry chamber, coordinating via radio. Central, we have confirmation of unauthorized access to Site 711. Artifact Beta is showing increased activity levels. Requesting full containment team and memory protocols for any civilians encountered. The hunter remained motionless, controlling his breathing despite mounting adrenaline. These weren't local authorities or even regular military. Their equipment and terminology suggested something more specialized, perhaps the modern incarnation of whatever organization had established this facility decades ago. The team member who had entered the storage area was methodically checking each aisle, tactical light sweeping across the shelving. The hunter's position would be compromised within minutes. Reaching slowly into his pack, the hunter retrieved his phone, ensuring it was set to silent mode. If he couldn't escape with his evidence, he could at least attempt to transmit it. No signal showed, as expected this far underground, but the device was set to automatically upload his photos to cloud storage once connection was re-established. "Sir, evidence of recent document access in the storage section," called the approaching team member. "Research journals from 61 have been disturbed." The civilian cursed under his breath. "Secure those materials. Full inventory when the containment team arrives." The hunter assessed his options. The team was focused on the facility itself, seemingly unaware of the crate and smaller cylinder he had originally discovered. If he could reach the surface, he might escape via the forest while they were occupied below. A sudden commotion from the research chamber provided the distraction he needed. The first team member shouting about active monitoring equipment and unauthorized surveillance. The civilian moved quickly toward the disturbance, leaving the entry chamber momentarily unguarded. The hunter seized the opportunity, moving silently from his hiding place to the base of the ladder. The ascent was nerve-wracking, each metal rung potentially creating noise that would betray his position. But years of careful movement through hunting terrain served him well, his progress swift and nearly silent. At the surface, the situation was equally tense. 2 black SUVs with government plates were parked at the edge of the clearing, and his dog was nowhere in sight, though he could hear barking from the direction of the vehicles. The hunter moved low through the underbrush, circling away from the facility entrance toward the sound of his dog. As he approached the vehicles, he saw her secured in a portable kennel in the rear of one SUV, guarded by another team member who monitored communications equipment. Retrieving the animal without detection would be impossible. The hunter made the difficult decision to proceed without her, trusting that a military organization would treat the animal humanely, at least temporarily. He could return for her once he had secured his evidence and contacted appropriate authorities. Moving through the forest with practiced stealth, the hunter put distance between himself and the facility, traveling perpendicular to his original approach route. Only when he had covered nearly a mile did he pause to check his phone. Still no signal in this remote valley. As darkness fell completely, the hunter navigated using familiar stars, working his way toward higher ground where cellular coverage might be possible. The night was unusually quiet. No owl calls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, as if the normal patterns of wildlife had been disrupted by whatever was happening at the facility. Near midnight, cresting a ridge, his phone finally registered a weak signal. The cloud upload began immediately, progress painfully slow given the connection quality and the quantity of evidence. The hunter used this time to assess his situation. His truck was compromised, likely under surveillance. His dog was in custody. Unknown government operatives with concerning terminology like memory protocols were aware of his intrusion into the facility. His home might already be under observation. The evidence upload completed just as the battery indicator turned red. The hunter switched off the device to conserve the remaining power, then continued his trek toward the nearest access road, planning to flag down a passing vehicle or hike to the small town if necessary. Dawn was breaking when he reached a fire road used primarily by Forest Service vehicles. Exhausted but determined, he followed it southward toward more populated areas. After an hour, the sound of an approaching engine prompted him to conceal himself in roadside vegetation. A Forest Service truck passed, then slowed, backing up to where disturbed gravel had revealed his passage. The driver, a woman in standard Forest Service uniform, exited the vehicle, scanning the area with practiced eyes. "I know someone's there," she called. "I'm not with them. If you're the hunter from Elk Ridge, I've been trying to find you." The hunter remained hidden, wary of a potential trap. "Deputy Collins contacted me," she continued. "Said you might be in trouble out here." "I'm Ranger Martinez, East District. Collins thinks something's not right about how your report was handled." Still cautious, the hunter observed her body language, noting the absence of tactical gear or communication devices beyond the standard Forest Service radio. After a long moment, he emerged partially from cover, remaining at a safe distance. "How do I know you're not with them?" he asked. The ranger held up a folded note. "Collins said to show you this. It's your original report form with his personal cell number. Said you'd recognize it." She placed the note on the hood of her truck and stepped back. The hunter approached cautiously, examining the document. Indeed, his original statement, with Collins's handwritten note and number added at the bottom. "What's going on?" the hunter asked, still maintaining distance. "Not sure exactly. Collins filed your report as procedure, but within hours got a call from someone claiming to be FBI, instructing him to delete all records of your visit. When he asked for credentials, they hung up. Then this morning, men in unmarked vehicles were asking questions in town about a missing hunter." She paused. "Your dog's at the ranger station. Someone dropped her off. No explanation." This unexpected development suggested the situation was even more complex than he had feared. "I need to get to town without being seen," the hunter said. The ranger nodded toward her truck. "I can help with that. But first, what exactly did you find out there?" "Something that was supposed to stay buried," the hunter replied. "Something people are willing to break protocol to keep secret." Back at the ranger station, a small outpost serving the eastern portion of the national forest, the hunter was reunited with his dog, who showed no signs of mistreatment beyond agitation. The ranger provided a secure office where he could make calls without risk of observation. His first call was to Deputy Collins, who answered immediately. "Thought you might be in trouble," Collins said without preamble. "After you left, things got strange. Got calls from agencies that shouldn't have known about your report so quickly. Then visitors asking questions but avoiding paperwork. I need to get my evidence to someone who can act on it properly," the hunter explained. "Someone outside the local chain. Got a contact at the state attorney general's office," Collins offered. "Former military. Handles cases involving federal overreach. Trustworthy." As they discussed arrangements, the hunter noticed a folded paper that had been placed inside his dog's collar, a typed note with no signature. "We know what you found. Others have discovered it before. None have lived to expose it. Walk away now. Last warning." The threat only strengthened his resolve. Whatever lay beneath that mountain had remained hidden for decades, its secrets protected by intimidation and possibly worse. But with evidence now secured in cloud storage and potential allies in both local law enforcement and the state AG's office, exposure seemed possible. The hunter handed the note to the ranger. "Looks like I've stirred up something significant." She studied it, expression grim. "Whoever these people are, they're operating outside normal channels. Even classified operations have oversight. That's what concerns me," the hunter replied. "If they're willing to threaten a civilian for accidentally discovering an abandoned facility, what else are they willing to do?" Deputy Collins arrived 30 minutes later, accompanied by a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as Special Investigator Reeves from the State Attorney General's office. Her credentials appeared legitimate, and her demeanor was professional but urgent. "I've reviewed the photos you uploaded," she stated without preamble. "If authentic, they represent a serious breach of governmental transparency laws. An unacknowledged facility operating on public land would require congressional oversight at minimum." "They're authentic," the hunter assured her. "I can provide exact coordinates." "Before we proceed, you should understand the risks," Reeves cautioned. "Based on similar cases I've handled, powerful interests will attempt to discredit you, possibly threaten you. They might claim national security concerns to suppress evidence." The hunter considered this, thinking of the strange cylinder with its shifting patterns, the research journals documenting unexplained incidents, the modern monitoring equipment in an allegedly abandoned facility. Whatever he had stumbled upon transcended ordinary classification. "People deserve to know what's happening on public land," he said finally, "especially if it involves technology with unknown risks." Reeves nodded approvingly. "We'll need to move quickly. My team can secure the evidence and initiate formal investigation, but only if we reach the facility before it's sanitized." As they organized a response team, the hunter reviewed his photos once more. The strange symbols, the classified documents, the active cylinder pulsing with unexplained energy. Whatever secrets lay beneath that mountain had remained hidden for over 60 years, but not for much longer. The ranger station's back office had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Maps of the national forest covered one wall, satellite imagery of the specific mountain region on another. The hunter sat at a desk, methodically checking equipment laid out before him. A high-capacity GPS tracker with satellite uplink, a compact digital camera with night vision capabilities. Deputy Collins nodded in agreement. These aren't normal operators. The way they sidestepped official channels, the complete absence of paperwork, we're dealing with something that exists outside standard oversight. The hunter remained focused on his preparations. The events of the past 48 hours had crystallized into a clarity of purpose that transcended his initial curiosity. This was no longer merely about uncovering a mystery. It was about accountability for whatever had been hidden beneath public land for decades. "We need to document everything before approaching the facility again," the hunter said, marking 3 access points on the map. "I'll approach from the eastern ridge, steeper terrain but better cover. If they've established a security perimeter, that's the most likely blind spot." Ranger Martinez frowned, adjusting her Forest Service uniform that had begun to show the strain of the extended operation. "You shouldn't go alone. This is well beyond a civilian matter now." "Which is precisely why I need to," the hunter countered. "I know that terrain better than anyone. You all have official positions that come with protocols and jurisdictional limitations. I don't." The debate continued for several minutes until Reeves finally intervened. "He's right. Our formal investigation will take days to authorize. By then, whatever is in that facility will be gone." She fixed the hunter with a serious gaze. "But you need to understand something. Once you document what's there, your priority is extraction, not confrontation. Get the evidence and get out. We'll handle the rest through official channels." The hunter nodded, accepting the specialized equipment she offered. A body camera designed to stream directly to secure servers, and a beacon that would allow them to track his location in real time. Deputy Collins pulled him aside as the others finalized logistics. "I've seen operations like this before, during my time in service. If they catch you in there..." He didn't finish the sentence, but his expression conveyed the severity of the risk. "I understand," the hunter replied. "That's why I need you to deliver something for me if I don't make it back." He handed the deputy a sealed envelope addressed to his son and daughter, along with a flash drive. "Everything I know about what's happening is on there, along with personal messages. My cabin keys are inside too. Make sure they get these." As the others stepped out to prepare vehicles, Ranger Martinez approached with additional topographical maps. "These show seasonal water sources not on the standard maps. Could provide alternative escape routes if needed." The hunter appreciated the practical assistance without unnecessary sentiment. His dog watched from the corner, sensing the gravity of preparations. The hunter knelt beside her, running a hand through her fur. "You're sitting this one out, old girl. Stay with the ranger until I get back." The animal whined softly, as if understanding the implied danger. 30 minutes later, final preparations were complete. The hunter had exchanged his usual hunting gear for darker, more tactical clothing provided by Deputy Collins. Not military grade, but sufficient for stealth movement through difficult terrain. His pack contained minimal equipment focused entirely on documentation and survival. "We'll establish a perimeter 3 miles from the site," Reeves explained. "Close enough to respond if needed, far enough to avoid detection. The moment you transmit confirmation of what's there, I can activate federal resources." The hunter checked his watch. 4:30 p.m. Approaching dusk would provide optimal cover for his final approach to the facility. "If I'm not back by dawn, don't come looking," he instructed. "Activate the contingency instead." The contingency being the automatic release of his evidence to select media outlets and oversight committees if he failed to enter a kill code every 12 hours. As the hunter moved toward the ranger's truck that would drop him at the trailhead, Deputy Collins offered a final handshake. "Good hunting," he said simply. The drive to the trailhead passed in silence, each person absorbed in their thoughts. The mountain range loomed ahead, indifferent to the human drama unfolding within its boundaries. The late afternoon light cast long shadows across the landscape, nature's own camouflage for the hunter's approach. At the drop point, Ranger Martinez killed the engine and turned to face him. The Forest Service was established to protect public lands for the benefit of all citizens. Whatever they're hiding up there violates everything we stand for. The hunter nodded, appreciating the principled perspective. I'll make sure everyone knows what's happening on their land. With a final equipment check, he stepped from the vehicle and moved immediately into the tree line. The familiar weight of his pack, the smell of pine and soil, the sound of wind through the canopy. These sensations grounded him as he began the ascent that would lead to answers. Behind him, the ranger's truck departed, leaving only the sounds of the forest and the hunter's measured breathing as he climbed steadily upward, purpose in every step. Dusk settled over the mountains like a shroud, colors fading to blues and grays as the hunter navigated the eastern approach to the facility. He moved with the patience of a predator, each step carefully placed, each pause calculated to detect any sign of surveillance or security. The route he'd chosen was demanding, a series of steep switchbacks up loose scree, followed by a traverse across an exposed ridge. Few would attempt it in fading light, which made it the perfect approach. His decades of experience in these mountains translated into confident movement where others would hesitate. 2 miles from the facility, the hunter caught his first indication of activity, the distant mechanical rhythm of generators, barely perceptible but distinctly out of place in the wilderness. He activated the body camera, ensuring the uplink was functioning. Beginning final approach. He whispered into the microphone concealed in his collar. Audio signature of power generation detected. Facility appears operational. As darkness deepened, the hunter relied increasingly on his night vision monocular, scanning the terrain ahead methodically. The facility clearing came into view shortly after 9 p.m., transformed from his previous visit. Temporary lighting illuminated a perimeter now guarded by sentries in tactical gear. 3 additional vehicles had joined the original SUVs, including what appeared to be a specialized transport truck. Most concerning was the activity around the main hatch. A portable crane had been erected, and teams were systematically removing equipment and containers from the underground structure. "They're evacuating the facility," the hunter reported quietly. Multiple personnel organized extraction operation underway. He documented the scene with a high-resolution camera, capturing faces where possible, vehicle license plates, and the specialized equipment being removed. Standard infiltration would be impossible given the security presence. But the hunter had anticipated this, having studied the technical diagrams found at the abandoned outpost. If the facility design remained consistent with those plans, there should be a secondary emergency exit on the far side, likely camouflaged and possibly unguarded, if its existence remained classified even within the current operation. The hunter circled wide, approaching from the north where the ridge provided optimal cover. His instincts proved correct. Approximately 200 yards from the main entrance, partially concealed by deliberate landscaping and natural growth, a smaller hatch was visible only because of recent disturbance to the surrounding vegetation. No guards were posted, but a modern electronic lock had been installed on the access panel. The hunter photographed it carefully, transmitting images back to Reeves and her team. "Secondary entrance located," he whispered. "Electronic security, but no personnel. Requesting guidance." After a tense 3-minute wait, a response came through his earpiece. "Lock appears to be standard government model. Try access code 711325, field override sequence." The hunter entered the code, holding his breath as the keypad processed the input. A green light illuminated, followed by the subtle click of the locking mechanism disengaging. "I'm in," he confirmed, easing the hatch open just enough to slip through. The secondary shaft was narrower than the main entrance, designed for emergency evacuation rather than equipment transport. A metal ladder descended into darkness, the bottom barely visible in the glow of minimal emergency lighting. The hunter secured the hatch above him before beginning his descent, moving cautiously to minimize noise. Unlike his previous exploration, he now faced an active operation with trained personnel who would respond immediately to any detection. At the bottom of the shaft, a narrow utility corridor extended in 2 directions, one presumably toward the main chamber he'd previously discovered, the other deeper into the mountain. Based on the facility diagrams, the latter should lead to the primary research area where the larger cylinder had been housed. Distant voices echoed from the direction of the main chamber, orders being issued, Equipment being moved. The hunter moved in the opposite direction, each step carefully placed to avoid creating sound on the concrete floor. The corridor eventually opened into what appeared to be a control room. Banks of equipment lining the walls, most of it decades old, but some clearly modern additions. Multiple screens displayed real-time data, including security camera feeds showing the evacuation process at the main entrance. But what dominated the center of the room was an elevated platform surrounded by specialized equipment, and on this platform stood an object that confirmed the hunter's most extraordinary suspicions. The cylinder he had originally discovered in the crate was merely a fragment, a sample of something far more significant. Here, secured in a containment field visible as a subtle distortion of the air, was what could only be described as a craft, approximately 20 feet in diameter, its surface featuring the same shifting patterns and symbols he had observed on the smaller artifacts. Its design defied conventional aeronautics. No visible propulsion system, no seams or access panels, just a seamless construction of the same mercury-like material that seemed simultaneously solid and fluid. The hunter stood transfixed, understanding immediately why such extraordinary security measures surrounded this facility. This was technology beyond current human capabilities. Whether recovered from a crash or obtained through other means, its implications were profound. The historical documents suddenly made sense. The classification levels, the abrupt closure of the facility in the 1960s, the continued secret monitoring decades later. The hunter activated all recording devices, documenting the craft from multiple angles, capturing the data displayed on nearby monitors. One screen in particular showed what appeared to be an analysis of the material composition, elements unknown to the standard periodic table, properties that violated established laws of physics. "Confirmed," he whispered into his microphone, voice tight with the magnitude of his discovery. "Non-terrestrial technology, active research program, decades of secrecy. Transmitting visual confirmation now." As the encrypted stream began uploading to Reeves's secure servers, the hunter continued his documentation, moving methodically around the chamber to capture every significant detail. The facility appeared to be a research installation dedicated to reverse engineering technology recovered decades earlier, with generations of scientists working in complete secrecy. So focused was he on documentation that the hunter nearly missed the subtle change in the ambient noise, the distant voices falling silent, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps approaching through the utility corridor. He had been discovered. The hunter quickly assessed his options. The main entrance was blocked by the evacuation team. The secondary exit would require climbing the shaft. Too slow with pursuers close behind. The only remaining option was to continue deeper into the facility, hoping to find another exit or at least a defensible position to complete the data transmission. He moved quickly through a doorway at the far side of the control room, entering what appeared to be a laboratory space filled with workstations and specialized equipment. Beyond this lay another corridor, this one sloping downward into the mountain. Behind him the sound of pursuit grew louder. Radio communications, the distinctive sound of weapons being readied. The hunter increased his pace, no longer concerned with stealth but focused entirely on maintaining his lead and completing the transmission. The corridor eventually opened into a massive natural cavern that had been incorporated into the facility design. The space was dominated by a pool of water, not a natural formation but a constructed containment area approximately 50 feet in diameter. Surrounding this pool was more research equipment, and suspended above it was another craft similar to the first but substantially larger. The hunter paused only long enough to document this secondary discovery before continuing along a catwalk that circled the perimeter of the cavern. According to the facility diagrams, there should be maintenance tunnels connecting to the surface for ventilation and emergency access. The sound of a door slamming open echoed through the cavern. His pursuers had reached the laboratory. The hunter increased his pace, moving along the catwalk toward what appeared to be a maintenance access point at the far side. The door yielded to his push, revealing a narrow utility tunnel with metal rungs embedded in the wall, leading upward. Without hesitation, the hunter began to climb, the sounds of pursuit growing louder below. "Target spotted in Sector 7, a voice called out. "He's accessing the maintenance shaft. Security team to surface exit points immediately." The hunter climbed faster, muscles burning with the effort. The shaft seemed endless, rising hundreds of feet through solid rock. His breath came in controlled gasps, each exhalation measured to maintain efficiency despite the physical strain. Above, a faint glow of moonlight signaled an approaching exit. The hunter redoubled his efforts, aware that security teams would be converging on all surface access points. His advantage was knowing exactly which exit he was approaching, one that, according to the diagrams, emerged in a particularly rugged section of the ridge where vehicles couldn't access. The final 20 feet of the climb were the most challenging, the shaft narrowing to barely accommodate his frame. With a final surge of effort, the hunter pushed through the access hatch, emerging onto a rocky outcropping illuminated only by the quarter moon overhead. Voices and flashlight beams were visible in the distance, security teams establishing a perimeter. The hunter moved immediately into the shadows of a boulder field, using natural cover to obscure his movement as he began a rapid descent down the eastern slope. What followed was a desperate race against both human pursuers and the unforgiving mountain terrain. The hunter navigated by instinct and memory, choosing routes that maximized his advantages. Narrow game trails too small for groups to follow effectively. Loose scree slopes that would slow pursuers unfamiliar with the technique for descending them. Densely wooded sections where darkness provided cover. Behind him, shouts and radio communications indicated a coordinated search effort expanding outward from the facility. Flashlight beams swept the forest, and at one point the distinctive sound of a helicopter approached, its searchlight cutting through the canopy in methodical patterns. The hunter used every trick acquired through decades in these mountains, crossing streams to break scent trails that dogs might follow, doubling back briefly to create false leads, using natural terrain features to mask his heat signature from any infrared equipment the helicopter might deploy. His breath came in controlled bursts, heart pounding not from exertion alone, but from the combination of physical strain and the knowledge of what pursued him. Not just men, but the machinery of a system designed to preserve secrets at any cost. 3 hours into his escape, the hunter reached the designated extraction point, a fire road junction where Ranger Martinez had staged a vehicle concealed by forest undergrowth. The ranger herself was nowhere in sight, following protocol to minimize risk of capture. The keys were hidden exactly where arranged, under the left rear wheel well. The hunter slipped into the unmarked truck, started the engine, and began the careful drive down Forest Service roads toward the rendezvous point 20 miles away. Only when the mountain was far behind him, the forest giving way to scattered ranches and eventually the outskirts of the small county seat, did the hunter allow himself to check the transmission status. The indicator showed complete, all evidence successfully uploaded to secure servers beyond the reach of whoever operated the facility. The adrenaline that had sustained him for hours began to subside, replaced by a profound awareness of what he had discovered and the implications that would soon ripple outward from this remote corner of the American wilderness. The diner sat at the intersection of two state highways, its neon sign casting a blue-red glow across the nearly empty parking lot. At 4:30 a.m., the only customers were long-haul truckers and the occasional insomniac local. The hunter chose a booth in the corner with clear sight lines to all entrances, his back to the wall, a position that offered both strategic advantage and the privacy needed for the meeting ahead. The waitress refilled his coffee without comment, accustomed to the strange hours and stranger clientele that passed through this transit point. The hunter nodded thanks, his attention focused on the door as headlights swept across the parking lot. Two figures entered, a man and woman in business attire that seemed out of place in the pre-dawn hours at a highway diner. They spotted him immediately, moving directly to his booth with the purposeful stride of professionals on assignment. "I'm Davis," the woman introduced herself, credentials appearing briefly before returning to an inner pocket. "National Investigative Press. This is my colleague from the Congressional Oversight Committee." The hunter didn't ask for the man's name, understanding the need for deniability at this stage. Instead, he slid a small drive across the table. "Everything is there. Video, photos, facility diagrams, historical documentation. It's also been uploaded to secure servers with deadman switches. If anything happens to me, it releases automatically to every major news outlet globally." Davis nodded, pocketing the drive. "The preliminary footage you transmitted has already been authenticated by 3 independent experts. No evidence of manipulation or fabrication." She leaned forward, voice lowered despite the empty diner. "Do you understand what you've discovered?" "Enough to know it shouldn't have been kept secret for over 60 years, the hunter replied. "Technology that could transform our understanding of physics, energy production, possibly interstellar travel, all buried to maintain certain advantages for whoever controls access." The congressional representative spoke for the first time. "Multiple laws have been broken. Misappropriation of public land, unauthorized research facilities, Black budget operations without congressional notification. The oversight implications alone are staggering. What happens now? The hunter asked. Controlled disclosure, Davis explained. We break the story simultaneously across multiple platforms: print, digital, broadcast. The Congressional Committee issues formal demands for information from relevant agencies. Public pressure prevents immediate classification or suppression. The hunter considered this approach. They'll deny everything, claim the footage is fabricated, the facility a hoax. Which is precisely why we need you for the on-record interview, Davis countered. Your background, your reputation in the community, your detailed knowledge of the terrain, all lend credibility that can't be easily dismissed. The congressional representative added, protection can be arranged, new identity if necessary. The hunter shook his head. I'm not hiding. Everything I did was legal, documenting unauthorized activity on public land. Let them try to explain why they maintained a secret research facility in a national forest for 6 decades. By afternoon, the story had broken nationally. The hunter watched from the safety of a hotel room as major networks interrupted regular programming with breaking news banners, classified alien technology hidden on public land for decades, and whistleblower exposes massive government cover-up in national forest. Davis had orchestrated the release masterfully, different outlets receiving different pieces of evidence simultaneously, creating a mosaic of revelation that couldn't be dismissed as the work of a single source. The Congressional Committee had issued formal demands for information from multiple agencies, all of which issued carefully worded no-comment responses that only fueled further speculation. Social media exploded with the footage of the craft, technical experts analyzing every frame, historians connecting dots between the facility and long-rumored black projects from the Cold War era. The hunter's identity remained protected for now, referred to only as an experienced outdoorsman with decades of familiarity with the region. By evening, satellite imagery showed extraordinary activity at the mountain facility. Military vehicles establishing a perimeter, helicopters landing and departing, what appeared to be high-ranking officials arriving via government transport. The following morning brought official confirmation that shocked even the hunter. A hastily organized press conference featured representatives from the Department of Defense, Energy, and State, acknowledging the existence of what they termed recovered non-conventional technology under research since 1958. The carefully scripted statement acknowledged that materials of uncertain origin had been recovered and studied for their unique properties, with potential applications for national security and scientific advancement. The secrecy was justified as necessary in the context of the Cold War and subsequent global security concerns. What followed was a coordinated federal response unprecedented in scale. The entire mountain region declared a temporary national security zone, access restricted within a 10-mile radius. Special congressional hearings were announced, whistleblower protections invoked, and a presidential statement promised full transparency consistent with legitimate security concerns. 3 days after his discovery had become public knowledge, the hunter stood on a distant ridge, observing the activity through binoculars. The mountain that had been his hunting ground for decades was now the center of global attention, its secrets finally exposed to the light. Ranger Martinez joined him, having navigated the Forest Service roads that remained accessible. They've requested all historical records related to the land transfer, she reported. 60 years of documents suddenly have national importance. Will it change anything? The hunter asked, lowering the binoculars. Already has, she replied. 3 other black sites on public land have been acknowledged in the past 24 hours. Congressional oversight committees are demanding full accounting of all classified activities on protected lands. The hunter nodded, satisfaction mixing with a certain melancholy. The mountains would never seem quite the same, knowing what had been hidden within them all these years. But there was also pride in having brought truth to light, in having fulfilled the most fundamental responsibility of citizenship, holding power accountable. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, the hunter turned away from the scene of frantic activity below. Whatever came next, hearings, investigations, perhaps fundamental reconsiderations of humanity's place in the cosmos, would unfold without his direct involvement. His role had been to open the door that others had kept locked for generations. I did what needed to be done, he said simply. The ranger nodded in understanding as they began the descent toward the waiting vehicle, leaving behind a mountain whose secrets, for better or worse, now belonged to the world. 6 months after the revelation that shook the world, the Mountain facility had been transformed from a hidden secret to the center of the most extensive government investigation in modern history. What had once been camouflaged entrances were now official access points, secured by military personnel but marked with the insignia of multiple oversight agencies, a visible symbol of the new transparency forced by the Hunter's discovery. The Hunter watched the congressional hearings from his cabin. The satellite television he rarely used, now tuned daily to C-SPAN, as officials from various agencies were called to account. The proceedings had an almost surreal quality. Career bureaucrats and military officers attempting to explain decades of deception while navigating the political theater of public accountability. The Special Subcommittee calls the Director of Special Projects Division, announced the committee chairperson, a stern-faced senator whose decades in government had not prepared her for revelations of this magnitude. The testimony that followed revealed the true scale of what the Hunter had stumbled upon, not merely a research facility, but the hub of a program spanning multiple sites across the country, all dedicated to reverse engineering technology recovered from what officials now carefully termed non-conventional aircraft that had crashed in 1947. For 78 years, this program operated without proper congressional oversight, the chairperson stated, reading from preliminary findings. Utilizing approximately $34 billion in unacknowledged appropriations, employing over 1,200 scientists and support personnel, all while maintaining absolute secrecy through methods that included intimidation, disinformation, and potentially worse. That potentially worse had become the focus of a separate Justice Department investigation, as evidence emerged of individuals who had previously discovered aspects of the program and subsequently disappeared. The remains of 3 hikers missing since 1976 had been recovered from a remote section of the facility. Their disappearance, originally attributed to an avalanche, now revealed as something far more sinister. The Hunter turned down the volume as the morning's testimony concluded, stepping onto his porch where his dog lay basking in spring sunshine. The animal had adapted remarkably well to sudden fame, accepting treats from journalists who occasionally still made the trek to the remote cabin despite the Hunter's consistent refusals for additional interviews. His phone rang, the secure line established for communications with the Congressional Investigation Team. The Hunter answered with the customary acknowledgement code, still finding the cloak and dagger protocols somewhat absurd given how public his identity had become. "The arrests are happening today," stated the congressional liaison without preamble. 17 individuals in total, including 3 former agency directors and the entire security team from the facility. The Attorney General will announce charges at 2 p.m. Eastern. The Hunter acknowledged the information with a simple, "understood," having learned that extended conversations on these lines were discouraged despite their supposed security. By afternoon, every news channel featured the same footage: FBI agents escorting handcuffed former officials into federal buildings, intercut with the Attorney General's somber announcement of charges including conspiracy, obstruction of justice, misappropriation of government resources, and in 3 cases, murder. These individuals operated as a government within the government, the Attorney General stated, appropriating public resources without oversight, concealing breakthrough technologies that could have benefited humanity, and taking extreme measures against anyone who threatened to expose their operation. The Hunter watched these developments with complex emotions. The vindication was undeniable, yet there was little satisfaction in seeing elderly former officials led away in handcuffs, their Cold War mindsets having convinced them they were patriots rather than conspirators. The local impact had been equally transformative. The small county seat had become a temporary home to journalists, researchers, and government investigators. Hotels that once struggled for occupancy during off-seasons now had waiting lists extending months. Locals who had initially regarded the Hunter with suspicion, the man who had brought unwelcome attention to their quiet community, now nodded respectfully when he made his infrequent trips to town. The ranger station, where the investigation had been coordinated, had been upgraded to a regional headquarters, with Ranger Martinez promoted to district supervisor. Deputy Collins had declined multiple offers to join federal agencies, preferring to remain in the community where his family had lived for generations, though he had accepted a position liaising between local law enforcement and the ongoing federal presence. Most significant were the technological implications. The Congressional Subcommittee had ordered a controlled declassification of research derived from the recovered materials, beginning with medical applications and energy generation technologies. Scientists from universities worldwide had been granted access to specific aspects of the recovered craft, creating unprecedented collaboration across disciplines and national boundaries. Initial assessments suggest the propulsion system operates on principles that effectively neutralize gravity, explained the newly appointed scientific oversight director on a news broadcast. The potential applications extend beyond transportation to include energy production, structural engineering, and possibly medical interventions for conditions affected by gravitational forces. These revelations had prompted widespread public demonstrations demanding full disclosure of all technologies derived from the program, countered by security experts warning of destabilizing effects if certain capabilities were released without proper controls. The debate had transformed political discourse, creating unlikely alliances across traditional partisan divides. For the hunter, however, the most profound impact remained personal. The knowledge that his instinct to investigate rather than walk away had altered the course of human history. The technologies hidden in that mountain might well accelerate human development by decades, possibly centuries. The truth once exposed had taken on a momentum of its own. As spring advanced in the mountains, bringing new growth to forests that had concealed secrets for generations, the hunter received an official communication unlike the others. Not a request for testimony or clarification of evidence, but an invitation to attend a ceremony at the state capitol where the governor would formally recognize his role in what was being called the most significant whistleblower action in American history. The state capitol building stood in stark contrast to the rugged mountains that had defined the hunter's life. Its neoclassical architecture and polished marble a world apart from granite outcroppings and pine forests. He felt distinctly out of place despite the new suit purchased specifically for this occasion, the formal attire unable to disguise the weathered outdoorsman beneath. The ceremony had been arranged in the Capitol Rotunda, its soaring dome amplifying even whispered conversations into a constant murmur as dignitaries, officials, and specially invited guests assembled. The hunter recognized faces from news broadcasts, the Congressional Committee chairperson, the Attorney General, scientific authorities who had become household names in recent months. Special Investigator Reeves approached, her formal attire a significant departure from the practical clothing she had worn during those tense days at the ranger station. They wanted to make this considerably more elaborate, she informed him with a knowing smile. I advised them about your preferences for simplicity. The hunter nodded appreciation. Is this really necessary? I just did what anyone would have done. That's precisely why it's necessary, Reeves replied. Because most wouldn't have done what you did. Most would have walked away when threatened, accepted the official dismissals, chosen personal safety over public interest. Before he could respond, ceremonial music signaled the arrival of the governor, prompting the assembly to take their designated positions. The hunter found himself directed to a seat on the stage, uncomfortable with the prominence but understanding the symbolic importance of his visibility. The governor approached the podium, her remarks beginning with the expected acknowledgments of distinguished guests before turning to the purpose of the gathering. Rarely in public service do we witness individual courage that fundamentally alters our understanding of government's relationship with its citizens, she stated. What began as a chance discovery in our state's wilderness became a revelation that will reshape not just national policy, but potentially human development itself. The hunter listened with a sense of detachment, the formal language of recognition seeming disconnected from the very real danger and uncertainty he had experienced. His attention drifted to the families seated in a special section, relatives of the hikers whose remains had been recovered from the facility, whose disappearance had been shrouded in manufactured mystery for nearly 50 years. This recognition is not merely for the act of discovery, the governor continued, but for the moral clarity that followed, the understanding that truth, however uncomfortable, must prevail over secrecy, that public interest must supersede institutional self-preservation. The ceremonial medal presented to the hunter felt strangely insignificant compared to the weight of what had been uncovered. He accepted it with appropriate gratitude, his brief remarks focusing not on his actions, but on the importance of the land itself, public wilderness that belonged to all citizens, whose protection and proper use was a collective responsibility. The mountains don't belong to any agency or program, he stated simply. They belonged to the people. What happened there betrayed that fundamental trust. The formal ceremony concluded with the governor announcing the establishment of a scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in transparency and oversight, named not for the hunter, at his insistence, but for the 3 hikers who had paid the ultimate price for their earlier discovery. At the reception that followed, the hunter found himself approached by family members of those hikers, now elderly siblings and middle-aged children of those who had vanished decades earlier. Their gratitude was palpable and deeply uncomfortable for the hunter, who felt undeserving of thanks for what circumstance and curiosity had set in motion. "My father always said something was wrong about the official explanation," stated one woman, now in her 50s. "He spent years trying to get authorities to conduct a proper search. Eventually, he was warned to stop asking questions." Similar stories emerged throughout the evening. Ordinary citizens who had encountered aspects of the program over decades, whose concerns had been dismissed as conspiracy theories, whose persistence had been met with escalating intimidation. The hunter recognized that his experience had been merely the latest in a long pattern, distinguished only by its outcome. As the formal events concluded, the hunter found a quiet moment alone on the Capitol building's steps, the spring evening offering a brief respite from social obligations. Deputy Collins joined him, both men more comfortable in silence than in the performative conversations inside. "System failed a lot of people for a long time," the deputy observed eventually. The hunter nodded. "System is just people making choices. Some made the wrong ones for what they thought were the right reasons. You could have too," Collins noted. "Could have walked away when things got dangerous. Most would have. Wouldn't have been able to live with it," the hunter replied simply. They stood in companionable silence, watching government officials and dignitaries depart in black sedans with security details. The machinery of governance continuing its function despite the exposed fault lines in its foundation. "What happens now?" Collins asked eventually. The hunter considered the question, its simplicity belying the complexity of what followed exposure on this scale. "Truth keeps spreading, I suppose. Too big to contain anymore." "And for you?" the deputy pressed. That question had no simple answer. The hunter's life had been fundamentally altered, privacy compromised, routine disrupted, perspective transformed. The mountains that had been his sanctuary now carried different significance, their secrets exposed, but perhaps not fully understood. "Back to the cabin," he answered finally. "Back to the forest. It's still home, whatever happened there." As ceremonial obligations concluded and the capital city receded in the rearview mirror of his truck, the hunter reflected on the disproportionate nature of recognition, how a medal and ceremony seemed inadequate measures for revelations that would reshape human understanding, yet simultaneously excessive for actions that had stemmed from simple curiosity and stubborn persistence. The true impact would unfold over years, possibly generations. New technologies developed from the recovered materials, historical understanding rewritten to incorporate deliberate deceptions, governance structures reformed to prevent similar secrecy. These outcomes, rather than ceremonies or medals, represented the meaningful legacy of what had begun with a metal crate, partially exposed by mountain erosion. Summer returned to the mountains with characteristic intensity, afternoon thunderstorms building over peaks, wildflowers carpeting meadows, wildlife emerging with new generations in tow. The hunter resumed aspects of his previous routine, finding solace in the unchanging rhythms of the natural world despite the transformed context of his existence. His cabin remained largely the same, though certain additions reflected new realities. A more sophisticated security system installed by the Congressional Committee, satellite internet equipment that allowed secure communications when necessary, reference books on physics and astronomy that would have seemed out of place before his discovery. The hunter's relationship with the forest had subtly shifted. Each hike, each hunting expedition now carried awareness that this landscape had concealed extraordinary secrets for generations. He found himself studying familiar terrain with new attention, wondering what else might lie beneath seemingly unremarkable features. Professional offers had arrived with surprising frequency, book deals promising substantial advances, consulting positions with research institutions, speaking engagements at universities. The hunter had declined them all, recognizing that his expertise lay in wilderness navigation and observation, not in interpreting the implications of advanced technology. He had accepted only one formal role, serving as a special advisor to the Congressional Subcommittee overseeing the public lands aspect of the investigation. This position required occasional video conferences and rare trips to Washington, but allowed him to ensure that the environmental impact of both the original facility and its current investigation remained a priority. 1 month after the recognition ceremony, the hunter received a communication from Scientific Oversight Director authorizing his return to the facility site, an area that remained restricted to all but essential personnel. The authorization cited his unique historical perspective as valuable to researchers attempting to understand the facility's evolution over decades. The approach to the site had been transformed, the rough fire road replaced by a properly engineered access route, security checkpoints staffed by military personnel with oversight from civilian agencies, temporary structures housing research teams and administrative staff. What had been a remote wilderness clearing was now effectively a small compound, its operations conducted under multiple layers of transparency requirements. The hunter presented his credentials at 3 successive checkpoints before reaching the primary facility entrance, the original hatch now incorporated into a more substantial surface structure. Scientists and technical staff moved purposefully between buildings, many wearing specialized protective equipment when handling materials from the underground chambers. The research director who had been assigned as his escort approached with the deferential attitude the hunter had come to recognize and dislike, the treatment reserved for someone viewed as historically significant rather than merely human. "We've established a complete historical timeline of the facility," the director explained as they descended into the main chamber via a newly installed elevator. "Your initial documentation was invaluable in understanding how the site evolved over decades. The underground complex had been extensively modified, walls removed to create larger research spaces, modern equipment installed alongside preserved original technology, previously hidden chambers fully excavated and documented. Teams of scientists worked in specialized zones, each focused on specific aspects of the recovered materials and technology. The propulsion system remains our primary focus," the director continued, leading the way toward what had been the cavern containing the larger craft. "Its principles contradict several fundamental assumptions in current physics. The implications extend far beyond transportation." The hunter listened politely, but found his attention drawn to details the scientists might consider insignificant. Marks on walls where equipment had been hastily removed during the evacuation, paths worn into concrete floors by decades of researchers following identical routes, improvised modifications that revealed how the facility had adapted to changing technologies while maintaining absolute secrecy. The cavern itself had been transformed into a primary research center, the pool drained and converted to a specialized containment area where the larger craft now rested on an elevated platform. Instruments surrounded it, monitoring aspects of its composition and function that remained largely theoretical to current scientific understanding. "We've confirmed your initial assessment," the director noted. "The material composition includes elements not currently on our periodic table. The energy signature suggests capabilities that would revolutionize virtually every aspect of modern technology." What struck the hunter most profoundly was not the advanced research or the extraordinary technology, but the human elements revealed during the investigation. Personal logs of scientists who had worked in isolation from the broader scientific community, their breakthrough discoveries never published. Security personnel who had spent careers ensuring the facility remained undetected, their service never acknowledged. Administrators who had managed massive budgets and personnel without formal authorization. "Has anyone calculated the cost?" the hunter asked, not referring to financial expenditures. The director seemed to understand the broader question. Several promising scientific careers effectively disappeared into this program. Families given false information about their loved ones' work, witnesses intimidated or worse. The human cost was substantial. After completing the official tour, the hunter requested time alone at the original discovery site, the clearing where the crate had first caught his attention. This area remained largely undisturbed, despite the extensive development elsewhere, preserved as a historical reference point in the ongoing investigation. Standing at the precise location where curiosity had overcome caution, where he had first glimpsed technology that defied conventional explanation, the hunter experienced not the satisfaction of vindication, but a more complex emotion, recognition of how thin the barrier had always been between accepted reality and extraordinary truth, how easily that barrier might have remained intact if erosion had not exposed a corner of a military crate. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the clearing, the hunter performed a small private ceremony, placing a simple marker he had carved from local pine bearing no names or dates, but only a simple inscription, "For those who looked and were not believed." The gesture felt inadequate yet necessary, an acknowledgement that his discovery had succeeded where others had failed, not through superior insight or courage, but through the convergence of circumstance and persistence. The hikers whose remains had been recovered deserved recognition at the site where their curiosity had led to their disappearance. Departing the facility as evening approached, the hunter paused for a final survey of the transformed landscape. The mountains themselves remained largely unchanged, indifferent to the extraordinary revelations occurring within their boundaries. This persistence of the natural world, despite human discoveries, conflicts, and transformations, offered a perspective that the hunter found oddly comforting. Whatever secrets remained, and he suspected many did, despite the current commitment to transparency, the mountains would continue their gradual processes, wearing down human constructions, reclaiming disturbed ground, maintaining the rhythms that had defined this landscape for millennia before human presence, and would continue long after current controversies had faded into historical footnotes. Autumn returned to the mountains with characteristic brilliance. Aspen groves transformed into shimmering gold, morning frost outlining each pine needle, elk bugling from ridge to ridge as ancient mating rituals played out against newly complicated backdrop. The hunter stood at the same viewpoint where he had first spotted the metallic reflection nearly a year earlier, the familiar landscape now carrying layers of transformed meaning. The facility remained visible in the distance, its expanded operations now officially acknowledged with appropriate signage and regulated access. Tours were being developed for educational purposes, the story of decades-long secrecy now incorporated into a narrative of scientific discovery and government reform. The hunter raised his binoculars, focusing not on the facility but on the surrounding wilderness, the patterns of game trails, the movement of wildlife returning to areas temporarily disrupted by human activity, the natural systems continuing their functions regardless of extraordinary revelations. In the valley below, a young bull elk emerged from forest cover, testing the air with caution born of evolutionary wisdom. The animal represented everything the hunter had valued before his discovery, the authentic wildness that existed independent of human understanding or interference. He lowered the binoculars, recognizing that his relationship with this landscape had permanently changed. The mountains were no longer merely wilderness to be navigated and appreciated, but a complex intersection of natural systems and human secrets, some revealed and others perhaps still concealed. The truth, like water finding its path downslope, had eventually emerged despite decades of containment. Whether other truths remained buried throughout these mountains, or elsewhere across landscapes presumed fully mapped and understood, remained an open question that would likely persist beyond his lifetime. The hunter shouldered his pack and began the descent toward his cabin, his dog ranging ahead with characteristic enthusiasm. Whatever revelations had emerged from these mountains, whatever technologies might transform human civilization in coming decades, the immediate reality remained unchanged. The need for shelter as winter approached, the companionship of a loyal animal, the satisfaction of self-reliance in challenging terrain. As he navigated the familiar trail, the hunter reflected that truth itself was perhaps like these mountains, its surface features visible and navigable, but its deeper structures concealed from casual observation, requiring persistent exploration and occasional unexpected exposures to reveal what lies beneath accepted reality. Some mysteries would remain unsolved, some technologies not fully understood, despite the most rigorous scientific investigation. The recovered craft represented possibilities beyond current human capacity to fully comprehend, a humbling reminder that knowledge always remains incomplete, that certainty is often the least scientific position possible. For the hunter, this philosophical recognition offered a peculiar comfort. The mountains had not surrendered all their secrets, nor had the technology recovered from within them. The frontier of understanding remained open, continuing to require the same qualities that had guided his initial investigation: curiosity, persistence, and willingness to follow evidence wherever it led. That evening, seated on his cabin porch as the first stars appeared above the ridgeline, the hunter experienced a moment of alignment between his former and current realities, the wilderness he had always known, and the transformed understanding of what it had contained. Both could exist simultaneously, neither diminishing the other. The mountains remained the mountains, regardless of what they concealed. The truth remained the truth, whether acknowledged or denied. And the hunter remained the hunter, changed by experience, but fundamentally connected to the landscape that had shaped his existence. Some truths change everything. Others simply confirm what we already suspected about the world and our place within it. The most profound may accomplish both simultaneously. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling investigations into the extraordinary secrets hidden in seemingly ordinary places. The truth is out there, sometimes buried in mountains, sometimes hiding in plain sight, always waiting for someone curious enough to look more closely.